You know that feeling when you're just starting your week, you've got your first cup of coffee, and everything feels calm. And then two police cruisers flash their blue and red right into your driveway at 8 a.m.? Yeah, that was my Monday, the start of the craziest, most vindictive, and frankly, most criminal battle for property rights I've ever been a part of. And I'm an attorney. I opened the door, coffee mug in hand, and the senior officer, badge red Harrison, looked at his notepad and said, "Sir, we have a complaint of criminal obstruction. Allegedly, you're denying access to essential community utilities located on your property." I had to blink 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Utilities? In my garage? On my private land that I own outright? Behind them, standing on my lawn like a self-appointed queen, was Vivian Thorne, our HOA president, arms crossed tighter than a vault, and her 20-year-old son, Leo, standing just off to the side, already filming me on his phone. That detail I didn't realize then was the whole point. I stepped outside, putting my coffee down on the small porch table. Vivian, with that look of righteous martyrdom she always wore, piped up immediately, not even waiting for the officers to finish. "Mr. Carter," she hissed, using my full name like an insult. "As I've explained repeatedly, your refusal to grant access to the main block junction box housed in your structure is jeopardizing the safety of all of Cypress Glen. Now, I might be many things, but a fool isn't one of them." And my legal brain was already screaming liar. I walked back inside, grabbed my deed and the surveyor's plat map, the one the county recorded, and spread it right out on the porch table for everyone to see. I pointed to the thick black line defining my lot, then to the green hatched lines showing the actual utility easements running along the back fence line, 50 feet from my garage. "Officer Harrison," I said calmly, tracing the lines, "my electrical service runs from the street meter on the exterior wall. There is zero utility infrastructure serving the block inside my structure. And even if there was, no one, not the HOA, not a contractor, and certainly not Mrs. Thorne, has presented a warrant or legal documentation granting them access to private property." Vivian's face went from indignant red to a blotchy purple. But Harrison, to his credit, was professional. He looked at the documents, looked at Vivian, and looked back at me. He handed my papers back. "Mr. Carter, this appears to be a civil matter, purely internal HOA politics. We see no criminal activity." They packed up and left, leaving Vivian sputtering on the curb while Leo kept his phone glued to my retreating figure. I watched her stomp off, her voice trailing. "This isn't over, Nolan. The board will hear about your violations." I just nodded. She was about to pick a fight with the wrong lawyer. The feeling I got wasn't anger, though. It was a deep, cold certainty that this whole scene wasn't a mistake or an overreach. It was calculated. That night, my home office, usually a sanctuary of peaceful research, became a war room. I pulled up the county recorder's database and dove into the dark, dusty corners of the Cypress Glen covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It didn't take long to find the smoking gun. While the original CCNRs didn't give the HOA the right to breathe on my garage door, there was an amendment filed in late 2019, a little 2-page edition called Emergency Access Rider 7. It was written in that vague, official-sounding language. The board may authorize access to any structure for utility inspection, when deemed necessary for community safety. It sounded legitimate. But the signature page was the giveaway, approved by a majority vote of homeowners present at a meeting on a Tuesday night I knew for a fact I hadn't attended. My instincts told me to check the quorum rules. Under state law, any amendment that affects property access rights requires 60% of all homeowners to vote yes, not just the 3 people who showed up to Vivian's pizza party. The entire rider was void from the start, a legal fiction created to grant power the board didn't have. But why go through all this theater? The answer was 2 clicks away. I ran a search on Vivian's husband, Gavin Thorne. Turns out he wasn't just a community husband. He was the proud owner of Regional Compliance Group, a contracting service. A quick cross-reference showed that Gavin's company had received nearly $70,000 from our HOA reserve fund over the last 2 years for urgent repairs. And sitting there, waiting for board approval, was a new proposal, a $95,000 critical electrical infrastructure assessment, complete with language demanding immediate interior access to all residential structures to prevent fire hazards. It was a textbook scheme. Invent an emergency, use fabricated legal authority to enforce compliance, and profit from the crisis. The brazenness of it made my coffee go cold again. To solidify my case, I made a few phone calls. First, I confirmed with the city utility inspector. "No, Mr. Carter, we don't care about the inside of your garage. That's HOA fantasy." Then I called Mrs. Albright, an elderly widow 3 doors down. She remembered the 2019 vote. "Oh, Terrence, dear," she sighed. "Vivian drove me there herself. It was just me and 2 other couples. She said it was an emergency vote about liability, and I trusted her. She said I was helping to protect the seniors. Just 3 people. My case just got a whole lot stronger and a whole lot sadder. They weren't just scammers. They were predators. This wasn't just about my garage anymore. This was about justice for my neighbors. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. I heard from Mr. Jimenez, who was terrified into letting Gavin inspect his wiring after Vivian threatened to report him to his insurance company for non-compliance. Gavin found minor deficiencies that cost Mr. Jimenez $2,500. Sarah Martinez, a single mom, told me Vivian threatened her family with foreclosure over a minor parking violation until Sarah agreed to pay Gavin $3,000 for mandatory plumbing updates. It was emotional extortion, pure and simple, and I felt a heavy responsibility to shut it down. I installed 3 discrete security cameras around my property, not because I was scared, but because I knew exactly what they were going to try next. The Thorns, were backed into a corner, and cornered people do desperate things. Sure enough, at 9:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, I was reviewing footage when one of the cameras, the one near my garage's side entrance, flashed. There was Leo Thorne, Vivian's son, creeping along my fence line wearing a dark hoodie and carrying something small and metallic. He knelt by my garage door, and in the clear, undeniable night vision, I watched him insert a thin probe, what looked like a pick, into the keyway. Attempted breaking and entering, caught on crystal-clear digital evidence. I didn't even call the local police immediately. I sent the video straight to Detective Riley on the County Fraud Task Force, who was already reviewing my initial dossier. I had them, dead to rights. The next evening was Vivian's emergency board meeting. I walked into the community clubhouse not as an angry homeowner, but as a prosecutor. The room was tense, just 8 people there, the few she'd managed to intimidate or trick. Vivian stood at the front, surrounded by a stack of what I suspected were blank papers meant to look like legal briefs. She launched into her pre-written speech about compliance and the safety risk posed by Mr. Carter's obstruction. I waited until she paused for breath, then I stood up. My voice was calm, cutting through the room's manufactured drama like glass. "Before this charade proceeds, Mrs. Thorne," I announced, "I think everyone needs to understand the legal issues at stake. This meeting is operating under false pretenses, using fabricated authority, and is, in fact, an extension of a systemic criminal fraud operation." Silence. Pin-drop silence. Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I opened my briefcase not to reveal a threat, but the truth. I started passing out copies of the state statute that voided Rider 7, the city document confirming they required no interior access, and the damning paperwork linking her husband's company to the fraudulent $95,000 proposal. "The amendment you claim grants you access to our homes," I explained, "was adopted in violation of state law, rendering it legally void. The $95,000 repair your husband is proposing is not required by any city ordinance or building code." The documents spoke for themselves. I watched the eyes of my neighbors as they read, their faces shifting from confusion to cold, burning anger. Then, the floodgates opened. Mr. Jimenez, his voice shaking with righteous fury, stood up. "Mrs. Thorne, are you telling me the $2,500 I paid your husband was based on a lie?" Sarah Martinez followed, her voice devastated. "You told me I could lose my house over a parking sticker. I took out a small loan because I trusted you." The meeting didn't end. It simply imploded. Neighbors surrounded Vivian, demanding answers, demanding refunds. She didn't stay to face the music. She screamed something about libel and retaliation and stormed out, Leo trailing behind her with his phone still filming, documenting her own public collapse. The momentum was now a wrecking ball. The next day, I coordinated with Detective Riley. They already had Leo's lock-picking footage and were building a file on Gavin's multi-county operation. But the Thorns still had one more act of malice left. I came home one Tuesday afternoon after meeting with the DA to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart dropped. Drawers were pulled open, papers scattered. My home office had been ransacked. The desktop computer where I'd organized my initial documents was gone. Vivian had done it. A final, desperate, and calculated act of evidence theft. She hadn't realized that for a lawyer, a physical computer is just a fancy keyboard. All my evidence, all the files, all the victim statements were backed up, triple encrypted, and hosted in the cloud. Her break-in accomplished nothing except to add a federal charge of burglary and obstruction of justice to her growing list of felonies. As Detective Riley stood in my ruined office, she smiled thinly. "Mr. Carter," she said, "Mrs. Thorne just guaranteed herself a much, much longer prison sentence. Breaking into an attorney's home to steal legal documents is about as serious as it gets." The end came fast. With the mountain of evidence, the multiple victims now organized into a class action group, and the two major felonies, attempted breaking and entering by Leo and federal burglary by Vivian, the U.S. Attorney's Office took over the case. They realized the Thorns were running a multi-state criminal enterprise, using the HOA structure as a shield. 3 months later, I sat in the packed federal courtroom for the sentencing. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, was merciless. He laid out the systematic exploitation, the abuse of neighborhood trust, and the violation of civil rights. When Sarah Martinez gave her victim impact statement, her voice was composed but shattering. "They didn't just steal our money," she said, looking directly at the judge. "They stole our peace of mind. My teenage son still worries about losing our house because of a lie." Judge Patricia Williams, known for her severity on white-collar crime, delivered the sentences with an unflinching gaze. She viewed the Thorne operation as a fundamental attack on community governance. The defendants systematically exploited positions of community trust to commit organized fraud, she declared. "This court will not tolerate the weaponization of democratic processes." Vivian Thorne, 14 years in federal prison. Gavin Thorne, 10 years in federal prison. Leo Thorne, 2 years in state prison, followed by community service maintaining neighborhood common areas. The irony of Leo, the one who tried to pick locks for profit, now having to perform honest community maintenance, was a beautiful, quiet justice. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a deep, exhausted sense of resolution. The Thorns were gone. Their stolen assets were being liquidated for full victim restitution. Our community, scarred but wiser, was drafting new, transparent bylaws. I got home and stood by the front door looking at my garage. It's still locked, of course. But now, it doesn't just stand as a marker of my property line. It's a symbol of the principle that private rights and community trust must be defended, that no amount of manufactured authority or false indignation can override the law. And the battle we fought, the legal precedent we set, is now being used by other communities across the state to protect themselves from their own Vivian Thorns. The story didn't end. It expanded. So I'm curious, have you ever dealt with an HOA president who acted like a king or had neighbors try to pull off a scam using official-looking nonsense? Drop your stories below. Let's talk about the fine line between community governance and outright tyranny and what it takes to actually win that fight. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about legal battles over everyday life. And always remember, know your deed, know your rights, and never let someone scare you into opening your door.